Welcome to Meet the Author, where you can join in on insightful conversations with best-selling and award-winning indie published authors. Your hosts today are Rob and Joan, who themselves are indie published authors, book publicists, and paranormal investigators with Tampa Bay Spirits, based in Tampa Bay, Florida. Thanks for dropping by. And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Joan. And we're so glad that you're here, whether you're watching us live tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, or if you're listening to us later on the podcast or rewatching the live show on any of our streaming channels. We're really happy that you decided to be in the audience today.
Yeah.
And we already have some people saying hello. Paul Rushworth Brown, you remember him. He's
From
the
down
author
under.
from Australia.
Right.
Yes, thanks for dropping in, Paul. It's
And
nice
good morning
to see
to
you.
you.
Yeah, good morning.
Good day. Good day.
And Marjorie Daring says, hi, all. Hi, Marjorie. We're glad that you're here. And Paul Hollis says, evening, Rob and Joan. Hello, Paul. Paul was in the audience when we were on a podcast earlier today.
And
Joe Conchel was listening also.
Yeah.
Joe says, hi, Rob and Joan. And Paul Rushworth Brown says, morning. And you know, he was on our program, and he's going to be on again in
June.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be having a special edition that we're working on of Meet the Author Podcast Aussie Edition. And it's going to be based on the Australia Book Fair interviews that Paul Rushworth Brown has been doing. So, and full disclosure, some people in the audience may notice one of my ears is bigger than the other today, noticeably to me anyway. I had surgery, and this is a bandage on here, but I had skin cancer surgery, and they got it all. So it's all good. And they looked at it today and said it was healing quite nicely.
Yep. They had to reconstruct his old ear, actually.
So maybe I'll make the other one.
That was crazy.
Bigger too. I don't know.
No.
It's mostly bandage right now.
George Dismuke says, what is it? What it was? What it going to be? Hello, George.
Hello,
George was
George.
Also in the audience.
Yeah.
Watching us on the pod.
Pretty soon we're going to be on 24/7. That'll be
Paul
crazy.
says, good on you. Glad it's better. Me
Yeah.
too.
Thank you,
Paul. It was stressful.
Okay. We got a lot of news tonight.
We do.
First of all, the top 5 downloads for the audio version on our podcast. Last 30 days, the U.S. was 57%, and it was majority. But number 2 is Australia. Thank you, Paul Rushworth Brown.
And
United...
Joe Conchel says, glad you're all right. And George Dismuke says, it makes it look like you're going to list to port.
Anyway, Australia is number 2. United Arab Emirates, believe it or not, is number 3. Bangladesh is number 4. And number 5 is Canada sliding in. So in the cold.
Come on, U.S. You used to be 90%.
Yeah.
You're slipping.
Okay. Voice of Indie Podcast.
Look who's here. Joy Shelton York.
Hi, Joy. How are you doing from Indiana?
Welcome.
Voice of Indie Podcast tonight, right after this show. The very last ad tells you exactly how to get over to their podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight's guest is going to be live, Martin Herman, mystery author. So it should be pretty interesting over there. thanks to our host, Beam Weeks, and Gary G's.
Yeah.
And then every Wednesday in the afternoon, we were just on there this afternoon on their show. CJ Peterson and Mike Clifton do the Book World, The Great Escape podcast. It's 1:00 Central Time every Wednesday. So they discuss very interesting things there.
Yeah, like us.
Like us. Yeah, there you go. Episode Rewind this Saturday night is going to be Shaniqua Karanja, children's author, very lovely person, episode 75. That's 5:30 p.m. right here where you're watching right now, Eastern Time here in the U.S. Next week, guess what? Our guest is going to be the Tony Razalito PI story author, Joe Conjol.
Yeah, it's a new Tony Razalito book.
He's got a new book to talk about. Also in the news.
Oh, look who's here. Chris Chrisman.
Hey, Chris Chrisman. How
Says
you doing?
hello, everyone. Hey, Chris. Glad to see you.
There you go. Also in the news, just released over the last week or two, because we were just showing recorded episodes. This is our first live one for a while.
Because of,
Marjorie Deering has The Horror Within released. Joe Conjol has the Best Served Cold book, was released. Gerald Darnell released The Woman in Apartment 223. And a new entry in the Magnolia Bluff, the latest entry, Cindy Davis released Only the Good Die Young. So those are 4 good books by 4 wonderful authors that you need to check out.
Well, I guess we're not good.
Okay.
Marjorie says, thanks for mentioning it.
Also,
I'm excited. We are too. We're going to have you on again, Marjorie, so you can talk about that book.
Also, I'm not going to say a lot about it right at this point, but we are encroaching on summer. Next month is May, June. At the end of June, we are departing Florida and we're heading over to Texas. And in Texas, we're going to have a book signing tour with several authors in the Texas area, in the Houston and Fort Worth areas. And we don't have a lot of details on it right now, but we're going to also have a live episode down there in San Leon at Pier 6 restaurant. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So
we're also going to be doing, hopefully, a live stream from the Haunted Hill House in Texas.
Out in Mineral Wells, the following week.
Oh my gosh. Joe Conjol said his power just went out. He just got back online. Glad you got
welcome back,
on.
Joe. We gave your book a plug.
Anyway, July 3rd, we'll be investigating at Haunted Hill House and 2 of our other team members, Les and Beth.
Yeah, they're going to join us out
founding
there.
members of that team, as a matter of fact, are going to be joining us out there, and we'll be investigating. And hopefully you'll be able to see that live. I think that they've got a studio there, so it should be easy for us to do it live there.
Yeah. So
anyway, and a Haunted Hill House. Joy Shelton said that sounds fun. Yeah. Also, our podcast for the paranormal podcast on Thursday, the 27th. If any of you remember Bob Long. He's worked with MUFON and then again as his own self for his freelancing as a UFO investigator, is going to be on the show talking about UFOs.
In our first year, actually, first 6 months.
All right. Anyway, we have a really exciting guest
Would you
tonight.
like to introduce Ron?
Yes. His name is Ronald E. Yates. He's been a journalist for years. He still is. He's written some historical fiction now, which is interesting, after a very amazing career, which we'll have to talk about. So let's bring him on without any further ado.
Come on in. Hey, Ron.
Hi, how are you?
We are well. How are you?
Very good. Very good. The sun is shining in California, so it's always a good day.
There you go. There you go.
The sun is shining here too, but
and nothing's shaking around, so everything's
that's
even
better.
Right? That's a plus.
And we're not having a hurricane, so
no shaking. No lot of shaking not going on.
There you go.
So, Ron, would you kind of like to tell people what you've done as a career and how you came to write fiction at this stage of the game?
Sure. Well, most of my life I spent as a journalist. I worked with the Chicago Tribune, and most of it, that time with the Tribune, I was a foreign correspondent in Asia and Latin America. And I was like the war and mayhem reporter. I was covering any place there was a war or mayhem. That's where I was. So I covered things like the fall of Saigon in 1975, the Tiananmen Square massacre in '89, El Salvador, the revolutions and going on there, and Guatemala and Nicaragua and places like that, all over South America, from Argentina all the way up to Colombia and into the even covering the Medellin cartel and all that stuff. So I've been around and done a lot of stuff, and I'm happy to say I'm still here to talk about it.
Yeah.
I wasn't really sure I was going to be here.
Just a note, you didn't start any of those conflicts so you could have work, right?
No, I never did. I don't think I ever started any.
Oh, good. Okay.
That would be an interesting thing to try to do, though. Of course, journalists are not above doing things like that, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's true, I suppose.
But when it came to writing, I guess I knew I liked writing when I was in the sixth grade. I had a teacher in the sixth grade. Her name was Miss, I can't remember what her first name was. I never called her by her first name anyway. It was Mrs. Gooch. And I loved writing stories, and she always encouraged the class to write things. And so I was one of the people that took her at her word, and I wrote a lot. And she encouraged me. And my mother also, when I was young, bought me a lot of books and took me to the library, which is a place I always found to be magical, and magnetic. And she often read to me when I was very small, before I could read. And I always felt that somehow I could see the stories unfolding before me. And when I could begin to read myself, then I began to devour everything that I could that I'd get my hands on. And so reading took me places where, as a growing boy, I otherwise couldn't go. And I always told my journalism students at the University of Illinois, when I was teaching there, that I always tell them, if you want to write well, you should read well. And the better quality stuff you read, the more that sticks with you, and you begin to learn to imitate, not plagiarize, but I mean imitate good writing. And it's and of course, going back to my training as a journalist, that was invaluable. Journalism teaches you to do certain things, like to use words economically, to be accurate, to write fast. So the transition from journalism to writing fiction has not been really difficult for me. They both utilize almost the same literary devices, actually: a transition, pacing, character development, all that. And ultimately, whether it's journalism or fiction or writing about normal stuff, the goal is to tell a good story.
That's right.
So my experiences as a journalist have been really priceless to me and vital as I transitioned from journalism to fiction. And I think any author who started as a journalist will tell you that. Hemingway, he always said, and he started as a journalist, and he always said, everything I ever learned about writing, I learned from the Kansas City Star style sheet and covering the streets of Kansas City.
Interesting.
And, I could say the same thing about my 27 years or so with the Chicago Tribune.
Joy Shelton York says, wow, you were certainly brave. And George Dismuke says, they were shooting journalists just for target practice in El Salvador. Kudos for surviving.
Yeah.
And Conjal says, never discount the power of a good teacher. Stays with you for life.
That's true. Yeah. It's absolutely true. Absolutely right. Teachers have such an incredible impact on kids, and it stays with you the rest of your life. Just absolutely accurate. Mm-hmm.
As to what Joy and George said, though, I agree with that. You're really brave. I mean, all of the places you've been, I mean, that, it's not like journalists never get hurt. They do, Oh,
yeah. I've lost a lot of friends.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrible.
And there's one locked up in Russia right now.
Yes. Being accused of being a spy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never worked in the Middle East. That's one place I never worked. So covering war and Vietnam, of course, if you were captured by the Khmer Rouge, they would kill you. That's
Yeah.
what happened to Sean Flynn's son. I mean,
Yes.
Errol
Errol
Flynn's son,
Finch
Sean
and
Flynn.
Sean. Yeah, I remember when that happened. Yeah.
And he disappeared, and they were killed. So 125 journalists lost their lives covering that war in Vietnam. It was very dangerous, not easy,
Yeah.
and you had to. A lot of it is when you're covering those kinds of stories. You have to. I always obeyed this little voice inside of me that just told me something. Don't go down don't go down that road, or don't go here, or don't do that. And I just obeyed it, and so I'm still around. I don't know. I don't know if
Good for
that's
you.
mysterious or what, but I just listened, and I survived. And but it's not all terrible. I mean, war is always terrible,
Right.
obviously. But I think the important thing for journalists to remember is that if you're there as a witness, and you can talk about things that otherwise would not be talked about.
That's
Whether
true.
it's atrocities or whatever it may be. And that's important. And also talk about the men and women who are doing the fighting, and how it affects them. And all of this is part of the package. And
it helps keep history straight and true.
correct.
Yeah.
It absolutely does.
Joyce Shelton York said, "Why did you decide to take that risk?" But I think you just told us why you did. You wanted to be a witness.
Yeah, well, I was in. You can see I was in the Army. I'm a veteran, and
Yeah.
when I was in the Army, I was involved with the Army Security Agency, which is a SIG Intel, and they're a signals intelligence organization. We worked for the NSA, and we provided information to them, and then I was an analyst part of that time, and I learned that when you're involved with when you're involved with something that's bigger than you, it puts everything in perspective. You are only as important as the job you're doing. You're not more important than the story. I think where a lot of journalists make a mistake is they think that somebody once said, what's a foreign correspondent? Well, a foreign correspondent is somebody who lives in foreign parts and corresponds, and thinks that the fact that he's arrived or she's arrived to cover the story is the most important thing about the story. And I think journalists have to learn to be a little humble, and just to be a witness, not to insert yourself into that whole process.
That's interesting. George Dismuke says there is a movie called Salvador starring James Woods that tells of the dangerous life of journalists in El Salvador. I lived in Honduras during that revolution.
Yeah, well, I covered. Yeah, I know that movie. It's very good, and I know the photographer that he's talking about. The photographer who's talked about in that film, who's the lead character, the character that James Woods plays.
Yeah,
I know him very well. So
yeah.
These are all real people, and yeah, it's El Salvador was a brutal, nasty, terrible war, and yeah, there I had a few interesting experiences there that I survived, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of people were killed trying to cover that war.
Oh, Joy has a good question. Has any agency ever tried to restrict your reporting? That's a good question.
That's a very good question.
Well, yes. Here's the thing. Because I was in military intelligence, I had a security clearance. It took more than a year and a half to get. It's called a top secret and crypto clearance. That's the highest clearance you can have. And because I had that clearance, and I'd spent this time in the military, when I would go to the U.S. embassies in the countries that I was covering, maybe it's Saigon, maybe, or Cambodia, or maybe it was in Afghanistan, or perhaps Pakistan, wherever, I would always tell them what my background was. And I said I had a TS&C. If you want to tell me things on deep background, I'm not going to burn you. And here's my number. I was RA 176-30827. That's my military my Army number. You can look it up and check me out. They would always do that. Then they would call me and say, come on over. And they would tell me everything I wanted to know because they knew I wasn't going to burn them.
Wow.
However, there were times when you're trying to cover something and they don't want you to cover it. I don't like the idea of being embedded. See, being embedded makes you part of the unit that you're covering.
That's right.
You have to stay with that unit. You can't go anyplace else. Whereas in Vietnam, we could go anywhere. We could jump on a hillock. Where are you going? Oh, we're going to go out to Quan Tri or something like that. And I'd say, can I go with you? Sure, hop on. And we'd go out, we'd cover the story, come back. And we'd do that all the time. Nobody was telling us where we couldn't go. It was a wide open war for journalists. It was the most incredible thing that's ever happened in the history of journalism covering war. Now it's all changed. The military controls everything. It controls where you can go, who you can talk to, where you are, what you can wear, everything. So it's a whole different world.
Wow.
That's from the American side. From the other side, you have to learn how to negotiate things that you want. And usually it means a little baksheesh, a little baksheesh, or a little bit of whatever.
Mordida.
Fill up a few bills, or carry cartons of cigarettes or whatever. And then that's how you might get past a particular checkpoint.
Yeah. Joe Conjal says, all right, let me get this up here. Totally agree on those journalists being more humble. Their opinion of the story is not as important to the viewers as the facts of the story. And that's what we all need. That's how we learn, isn't it? Is from all of these facts. So
we need to take our break.
We need to take our first commercial break, and then we need to tell you about
we need to talk about your books.
Your books. He's written some fiction books that I think you'll find very interesting.
All right, so sit tight, everybody, for a word from our sponsors.
Mystery hovers in the Magnolia Bluff Public Library. It has nothing to do with the hundreds of suspense novels on its shelves. Caroline McCluskey is the librarian. She finds a crimson hat and a black and white poodle puppy. They belong to Esther Williams. Esther is missing. The police can't find her. Neither can the FBI. Esther's only hope is a ring of 3 women investigators who form the Round Table. The Round Table has already solved one mystery in town. But this time, a woman's life is at stake. The Doggone Diamond Dilemma is now available on Amazon.
They thought the siren was dead. In the novel Siren Song by author George Dismukes, James Harmon shot her twice. Several people saw her dead body sinking slowly into the abyss. But now, in Siren Song 2, evidence suggests that she may still be alive.
She killed that boatload of people. It was her! And she's just getting started!
Angie, that's impossible.
The cold chill up my spine tells me it's not impossible. We've got to start all over again. And this time, do it right.
Siren Song 2. The story continues. Available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites. Get your copy today.
The clock is ticking. Can Gracie uncover the truth?
Philip Pliant is the wealthy opportunist plastics dealer and CEO of Pliant Industries. He's also a master thief, creating a pervasive threat to the manufacturing infrastructure in the Caribbean islands markets. With the cartel as his stealth client, the naive city leaders have been seduced, enabling the production of more than 3-dimensional building materials.
The expected profits are monstrous.
Is the R Group, now led by Gracie and the family heirs, strong enough to win against this predator?
Can JJ's cats act on the root cause analysis in time?
Will Gracie be able to squash Pliant and the cartels?
Gracie never considered their lives would hang in the balance. The clock is ticking. 5, 4, 3.
And we're back.
We're back. So let's start with some of your books here. The first one, Finding Billy Battles. Now, this is a trilogy, and you want to tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, well, this is book one in the trilogy. It starts off in the whole book, the whole trilogy tells the story of a man named William Raglan Battles. And he's born in 1860, and he dies in 1960. He lives 100 years. And
wow.
When he's 98 years old, he's in this is all a real place. There's a place called in Leavenworth, Kansas, called it used to be called the Wadsworth Old Soldiers Home. He's there, he's 98, and he meets his great grandson. And those two begin to have a relationship, and he wants Billy wants to have his grandson, whose name is Sales, Ted Sales, to tell his story of his life, because he's written it down, but he hasn't written it down in book form. He's got all this stuff done and all these materials, and so he convinces his great grandson to do it over a period of years. And so the book starts off with Billy's birth in 1860 in the western part of Kansas, and they wind up, the father goes into the Civil War and is killed, doesn't come home. So the mother, who is a second generation German, decides he wants to go back to her hometown, which was Lawrence, Kansas, which is one of the few cities founded in American history that had a political foundation, which is to oppose slavery. And it was a terminus for the Underground Railroad, bringing slaves out of the South. So he goes there and grows up in Lawrence, and over time he becomes interested in writing himself, and he gets to be, his mother wants him to go to the University of Kansas, which had just been opened there in Lawrence, and he spends 1 year there, and he goes to Dodge City to work with a newspaper publisher who's publishing the paper in Lawrence, and he takes him with him to Dodge City, and that begins his adventures. He begins to get involved with all kinds of things. There's a terrible accident, actually a tragedy, in which he encounters a pretty nasty group of people on their old homestead. These people were squatting on it, and he goes there, and he gets into an altercation, and he winds up defending himself and two other people, and in defending himself, he winds up killing the matriarch of this gang. And he says he never wanted to do that, never tried, but she stepped into the front and into the middle of the shooting, which is taking place on that homestead, and she's killed. And that has an impact on the rest of his life, because this gang never stops hunting him and never stops trying to kill him because of what he did, though it was an accident. He was not shooting at her. So anyway, that's how it all starts. He gets involved as a 19-year-old kid. This is how his whole life changes. So he winds up leaving Dodge City, and while he's in Dodge City, he makes the acquaintance of two people that will come to have a big impact on his life up to a certain point. Bat Masterson, who was the sheriff of Ford County then, and Wyatt Earp, who was the city marshal, the city policeman, sort of, more or less. He meets those two, and gets to know them, and then he leaves and he goes to Colorado, and he gets involved with other things, and so the first book is just kind of getting you introduced to him and his life, and how he's one tragedy after another just pulls and pushes him through life, and
it's all historically accurate, which is
yes, it's all based. I call my book Faction. These books I call them faction because it's a combination of fact and fiction. The people, I have real people in these books. They actually existed, and some of the incidents I talk about and some of the events, they were real. But I insert my fictional characters into those events, and also into interactions with those real characters, those real people. And that's why I call it faction. And
Matt Masterson definitely did the job that you said he did.
Yeah, Wyatt Earp too.
Wyatt Earp too.
Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, they were all in there. And then he also meets General Frederick Funston, who was a major figure in the 19th century and part of the early part of the 20th century, but died early on of fairly young in his 50s of a heart attack in San Antonio. Otherwise, he would have been in charge of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I in France. He also meets George S. Patton when he's a shaved-tail lieutenant, because he's involved with the tracking down Pancho Villa in 1916, all throughout Mexico.
Is that in the first book?
That's in the third book.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to the second book then,
Okay.
which is the Improbable Journey of Billy Battles. And tell us a little bit about that. And hold on a second. We have a comment here.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Joe says, such an interesting time to write about. Yeah, it is. Well, we get a whole 100 years, though, because he lived a long time.
Well, that's what I thought was fascinating. Here's a guy who was born on the western plains of Kansas when transportation was by covered wagon or horse.
Yeah.
And by the time he dies, we have jet planes, Boeing 707s flying around the world.
Exactly. Joy Shelton York said, wow, lots of historical characters. Yep, my grandmother was born all of my grandparents actually were born in the 1800s and died seeing computers and jets and not cell phones, but they didn't live that long. But they saw
They're
a lot.
lucky.
But they saw so much. I think about it all the time. It's like, wow. Okay, so now the Improbable Journeys, we're talking in more towards, I guess, the middle of his life. Is that where we are now?
Yeah, what happens is Billy has a tragedy in his life, and I don't want to give, I tell
no
you.
spoilers. No spoilers.
This little spoiler alert. He loses his first wife, and it really has a tremendous impact on him, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. He's still a young man. He has a daughter. She's only 4 or 5 years old. He has a mother. His mother is living with them, and so he just kind of crumbles. He doesn't know what to do, and he decides this one person he had met a long time before had gone. He was French, actually Italian, French-Italian, and he had gone to Southeast Asia, had gone to French Indochina, which was a Vietnam, but it was a French, it's a French colony at that time. And he had gone there. And so Billy decides he's going to go there because he knows him, and he figures he just has to get away. So he takes off, gets on the boat. A real ship is called the SS China. It actually existed, so I have to describe that thing very carefully. And I'm very accurate. I'm trying to be very accurate about all these details. So I describe everything in great detail because I wanted to make sure that I had everything down. I wanted readers to feel that what they were reading is real, because I want it to be real, So he goes on this boat, and while he's on the boat, on the ship, he meets a woman who turns out to be a widowed German baroness, and her name is Katharina von Schreiber. And he meets her on the ship. They don't get along very well. They don't like each other very much, but over time they get to know each other because they're both fleeing. She tells Billy finally. She says, "I need some help because I'm being followed by people." And he said, "Why?" He says, "Well," she said, I killed my husband, and this was in Chicago, and my husband was a German baron, and it was an accidental thing, but I killed him. You notice I said I killed him. I didn't murder him, she said. I only killed him because it was in self-defense. And so he and Katrina get to know each other, and they're on their way. He's on the way to Vietnam, or actually Saigon at that time, and she's on her way to the Philippines, where her brother is involved in the wood industry, lumber industry. So they get to know each other on the ship, and then eventually they get to the Philippines, and then Billy stays there for a while. Then he goes on by himself to Saigon, and then that story evolves there. And so Billy becomes kind of like the very first American to be involved in the Vietnam War, because he gets involved in this, and really not with the French so much, but with the people who were trying to get the French out. And so he becomes involved with that and spends time there. And I spent a lot of time in Vietnam. And one of the things I did do in this book was all the locations that I have in the book are places that I worked and lived. So I knew them very well. And when I was there, I was always interested in history. So I was always interested in the colonial period in Asia. What was happening in Cambodia? What was happening in all throughout Asia, where the French were, where the English were in Malaysia, and also in Singapore, Hong Kong, the Dutch and Indonesia. I learned about these things, and I wanted to include them in my book. So I was able to do that. And so, and other thing, I have these people being his mother being a second generation German, because I speak German. My wife is German, and we don't speak English together. We only speak German together here at home. So,
that's interesting.
So I was able to use my German in that book, and there's some German in there, not a lot, but you'll see if you read it, you'll see some of the stuff that pops up there so often. And also Vietnamese. I tried to learn some of that when I was living there, and so I use a little Vietnamese too, just to provide accuracy, just provide some kind of sense of place and a sense of realism.
So nice. That brings us to the Lost Years. This is the last of the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, this one begins. Oh, let me back up just one second. Go back to the Philippines, because Billy gets involved. We all know about the Spanish-American War, which took place in 1898, and most of us think, well, it was in Cuba and Puerto Rico. That's where it was, and it lasted about a year. It was over, right? And then Teddy Roosevelt rode up the hill and San Juan Hill and all that.
Yeah.
The Rough Riders and stuff. Well, what people don't know in this country is that the major part of the war was fought in the Philippines, not in Cuba and not in Puerto Rico. It was fought in the Philippines over a period of several years. It wasn't driving out the Spanish. That only took about a couple of weeks. But then the Americans stayed there and didn't leave. And they got involved then in trying to control what was happening in the Philippines. Here are the Filipino people that had been under control of the Spanish for several hundred years. They wanted their freedom. Now here comes the United States, and even though we're not a colonial power at the time, we're acting like a colonial power, and so they revolt against us. There's an uprising, and it's pretty bloody, and it lasts until 1902, from 1898 to about 1902. 4 years we were fighting there. A lot of Americans died, but hundreds of thousands of Filipinos died.
Mm.
So Billy's involved there, and you'll see through his eyes what it was like and what was happening and why we were there. And you'll get all from both sides. You'll learn quite a bit about that whole period in our history. Then eventually he comes back to the States, and that's where we find picking up book number 3, where he becomes more sedentary in his life. He and Katerina they decide to live in Chicago. He becomes a managing editor of the Chicago Daily Record, which was a real newspaper. And while they're there, he gets a call from Frederick Funston, General Frederick Funston, who was in charge. He was a colonel at the time in the Philippines. He is now in charge of the whole southwest area of the United States, and he's dealing with the Mexican incursion, the rebels coming across the border into the United States. And you have this incident in Columbia, New Mexico, where Pancho Villa comes in. Pancho Villa comes in and kills a lot of people and burns the town down. So that requires a response. And meanwhile, the Germans are down in Veracruz and places like this, trying to get the Mexicans to create havoc along the U.S.-Mexico border, because war is going on and World War I is happening in Europe, and they want to keep the U.S. out of the war. It's all true. Actually, had all these German spies were down there. They're up along the border. They were arming Pancho Villa. They were arming Emiliano Zapata, and trying to cause all kinds of havoc along the Mexican-U.S. border. So what happens is General Pershing is sent down into Mexico along with other people, and one of them being George S. Patton when he was a lieutenant, and to chase down and find Pancho Villa and catch him, kill him, hang him, or whatever. Well, it's an impossible thing. Here are all these soldiers going down into Mexico. They've got old Dodge touring cars. They have a lot of horses, and they're making all kinds of noise. And of course, Pancho Villa is always being hidden by people because they loved him. You know, he was a revolutionary, and they were trying to keep him away from the Americans. So it was a lost cause, but Billy's involved there too, and so he gets involved in all that stuff. And
George Dismuke says Blackjack, Pershing, and Patton chased Pancho Villa down around Brackettville.
Right, right. They were all over. And Patton, one thing he did do, and I mentioned this, and I tell about it in my book, is he got Pancho Villa's #1 lieutenant, killed him. They found him at a ranch. They shot him, killed him, and he wanted to bring the body back. So how did he do it? He put him on the hood of the car like a deer, and brought the body back to the to the camp.
The human race, we're great, aren't we? Joe Conchel had an interesting question. Just curious, does your wife speak English, or does she just prefer to speak German?
She speaks English now. When I first met her, she didn't, and I was learning German at the time in the Army, and that's when I met her. I was in the military intelligence in Europe, in Germany, and but it became our courting language, and it just stayed that way, and it never stopped. So, but we're with other people. We speak both. I mean, we're going back and forth between German and English all the time. You know.
That's great.
Okay, we need to take our last break.
Yeah, and then we'll do the book giveaway.
When we come back, we'll do the book giveaway, and then tell everybody where to reach you.
Sure.
And
wait a minute.
Let's go ahead and break, and we'll.
Wait a minute. This is just pertinent to what we were talking about. George says, "Yep, they hung poor Pancho upside down for display." Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Ugh. Yeah,
that wasn't us, though. That was the Mexicans.
Oh. Okay. We'll be right back.
All right. So we're going to take another break. Don't go away. We still have some more to talk about.
First, there was Siren Song, then Siren Song 2. Now comes The Siren Hunter, a continuing saga about Angie Holland and her never-ending battle with the mythological denizens that are not even supposed to exist. Is The Siren Hunter a conclusion to the undersea horror? Only the sirens know for sure.
The Siren Hunter, now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites. Or contact this podcast. The trilogy is complete.
People Who Like to Read Want to Get Their Hands on Books by Becca Jones.
Becca Jones, the breakthrough author who tells it like it is. It takes courage to tell a story when it reveals dark secrets. Becca Jones delves deep into the hidden world of sexual abuse. She tells what happened and also tells how she survived.
Meant to Be is much more than just entertaining. Meant to Be gives you a point of reference, hope to cling to, and becomes a guide for survival if you have suffered the same thing. Meant to Be, Becca Jones, a must-have.
Meant to Be is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites.
Madison Jackson loved being a cop. A young girl is raped and murdered near Burnett Reservoir. Madison vows to get justice for the child. Madison travels to the heart of Mexican cartel country. She is kidnapped, tortured. Will Madison ever make it home? Justice by Kelly Marshall, only at Amazon.com.
Hi, we're back.
We're back.
Marjorie Deering had made a comment earlier. She said, major changes seem to be coming faster and faster, because we were talking about, you know, what he had seen during that 100 years. And I don't know. I think that that's true.
Yeah.
Major changes do
Sure
seem.
seems to be.
Maybe it's just because we're old and it seems to be coming
I think everything's compressed now because of technology. It compresses everything, and it happens so fast. You're right. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of the advances that have taken place in just the last 50 years. Think
I
about
know.
it. The internet, cell phones, computers, all that stuff didn't exist before, you know.
Well,
Incredible.
computers would take up, a huge room would be one computer to do what our smartphones can do. Our smart watches can do. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's great. It's crazy. It really is.
This
I can
iPhone
remember-
is more powerful than the computers that the astronauts used to go to the moon in 1969.
That's right.
Yeah.
It can actually calculate faster than
Mhm.
any of those computers could. And we sent somebody to the moon like that.
Right.
Chris Chrisman said advances are speeding up time. That's the truth. I remember when we had those huge phones, remember the giant cell phones?
Yeah, right.
And we went from that to really tiny phones, and now we're back to everybody having bigger phones. It's, it's been.
Let's get the book giveaway started, and then
All right.
and while we're doing the book giveaway, we'll tell everybody how to reach you. We're going to launch this out here. The book giveaway, the first 3 people to email jhawker69@gmail.com will win ebook copies of the Billy Battles trilogy.
So
All 3 books.
you'll get all 3 books.
And that's
Absolutely.
jhawker69@gmail.com. That's JHAWKER69@gmail.com.
And remember, if you're listening on the podcast, you don't know whether everybody's typed in today and they've gotten it or something. So go ahead and just mention you listen to this.
Even if it's weeks from now, just, you don't know, all the books may not have been given away. So go ahead and email if you're really interested in it. I'd love to hear from you anyway.
Right. Joe Conjal said, all of our current technology allows us to find out about new technology. Then faster.
Is that AI or all?
What?
Is that AI of our current technology?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I just read all. I don't
It could
know,
be
Joe.
all. Yeah.
You can tell it. AI of our current technology allows
That
us
makes
to find
sense,
out
too.
about new technology faster.
Both
than
work,
years
so
ago.
you're right, Joe. You're right, Joe. On
Whichever.
both of those.
AI is a very, it's being perceived as a pretty dangerous thing now, thinking about being able to take over the entire world and then make us their slaves, who knows?
No, it's all.
It's all. He meant all the way.
It's all, but we just jumped into sci-fi there.
AI is scary. It's like, did they not watch The Terminator? I think some of these scientists don't go to the movies. Go to the movies, scientists.
And they didn't watch Jurassic Park,
They didn't watch
that are trying to...
Canada, they're
just going to make the small
embedding dinosaur DNA into chickens. And I'm like, did you not see Jurassic Park?
Yeah,
Somebody actually said that to them, and they said, well, it's just the little ones. Hello, if you'd really seen the movie, that's what they said in the movie too.
Can you imagine 1,000-pound chickens walking around? Think about that.
Just think of the barbecue, though.
The chickens are just going to be the living incubators. They're going to hatch dinosaurs, actual dinosaurs. Yeah, and they're also trying to clone mastodons. The mammoth. That's it. The woolly mammoth. That's it. Yep.
They're doing it. They'll do it.
Good idea.
So
well,
how else can we reach?
Okay,
Ron?
let me tell you all the places you can reach him. His website is Ronald Yates Books. So that's RONALDYATESBOOKS. RonaldYates.com.
RonaldYatesBooks.com, right.
Books.com.
Yep, books.com. I'm sorry, I left out the books. RonaldYatesBooks.com. Facebook is Ronald Yates Books. Substack.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. Substack is ronyates.substack.com. I'm going to spell that for you because we've never done Substack before, in case you haven't gone there yet. RONYATESUBSTACK.com. It's all the rage right now, Substack. You should go. In LinkedIn, it's Ron Yates. And as we said, his email is jhawker69@gmail.com. JHAWKER69. That's the book giveaway. We have 2 more comments here. Let's see what we've got. George Dismuke says, just as long as they don't clone Deborah. That's his 3rd wife. Yeah. Oh dear. We've already said she's a dragon. I guess now we're saying she's a dinosaur. Chris Chrisman said, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. Silly scientists.
Yeah. Think about COVID, folks.
Yeah, no
kidding. I know exactly right. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. Oh my Lord. We're going to be the death of ourselves.
So Ron, you've got some other books too that you've published. Would you like to talk about those just a little bit?
You bring up
well, let's see. I have this book. I didn't publish. This was published by McGraw-Hill. This was done about back in 1998.
And we've got that one here.
We've got that one right here. The Kikkoman Chronicles.
It's a corporate biography I did for McGraw-Hill, and that was one of my traditionally published books. And it's done quite well. It's been translated into 10 different languages now. So it's pretty much all around the world, because Kikkoman is a very savvy global kind of a company. In fact, the oldest continuously operated company in Japan. It started in about 1630 by a woman, by the way.
Oh.
And, yes, she started it, and which is unusual in Japan, because women, don't have that kind of a role in Japan. Well, they didn't used to. They're getting more and more that way now. But so it was quite unique. And so it was an interesting company, and they began marketing their soy sauce in this country right after World War II, and nobody knew what it was. I mean, they couldn't tell. Americans didn't know soy sauce from India ink. Let's face it. They didn't know what it was. And
it tasted better.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better than trying to drink India ink.
So they went to a country that was totally unfamiliar with their product and marketed it and got an enormous market. Now they're the biggest market share of soy sauce in the United States, also in Europe. The Dutch began importing soy sauce back to Europe in around 1670, 1680.
Wow.
And, it was the secret ingredient in Louis XIV's kitchen in the 18th century.
Wow.
So all kinds of stuff. That's what the book talks about. It talks all about this kind of stuff. So the history of how soy sauce began, where it came from, how it was marketed, where it went, and it's just kind of it's been used in business schools throughout the country as a textbook for how to market unknown products and unfamiliar markets.
I know. Do the Dutch use a lot of soy sauce in their sandwiches and stuff? Because they make like amazing sandwiches there that
they might.
They've
been doing it since the mid 17th century, and Kikkoman built a plant there. That's how I lead my book off. I was there for the opening of this plant, and or the groundbreaking of the plant, and so it's one of the few plants in Europe that they have, and there are two in this country. One is in Walworth, Wisconsin, and another one out in California.
That's really interesting.
Anyway, that's that book, and then I'm right now. I'm now that I finished the trilogy, I'm off on a new book that it's really I'm finishing up a novel now about foreign correspondence in Asia, and it's not historical fiction. It's essentially it's based on some of my own experiences covering war and revolution and mayhem around the world. But the working title is Asia Hands: A Tale of Foreign Correspondence and Other Miscreants in the Orient. And here's how I describe it very quickly: a mysterious object of unknown origin. You'll like this, Joan. A mysterious object of unknown origin hidden in the heart of an impenetrable Southeast Asian jungle. A covert alliance of dangerous people determined to keep it concealed. Treacherous secret agents, betrayal, assassination, murder. It's one hell of a story, and 2 foreign correspondents, one recently retired and the other approaching burnout, are on the scent. Meet Cooper McGrath and Clayton Brandt. They have just stumbled upon the biggest story of their lives, one that could have staggering ramifications for the planet and its people. Now all they have to do is live long enough to tell it. Will they meet their deadlines or will they meet their deaths? What
did you say the title is of that one?
The title is the working title is Asia Hands. Asia Hands, that's what people call journalists who are familiar with a certain part of of Asia, or you could be a Latin America hand or a European hand. So Asia Hand, a tale of foreign correspondents and other miscreants in the Orient.
And
so
when,
a little bit of everything
when do
in
you
there.
think that'll be coming out?
I don't know. Probably, I'm hoping to get it out this year. I'm almost down to the very end of it. So probably maybe either later this year or the beginning of 2024.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I think that would make a really good movie.
Well, everybody who's read my trilogy, they all come back with me with emails saying, "Why isn't this a Netflix series?" You know.
There you go.
And, why isn't this an Amazon Prime series, a mini series?
There you go.
Why not? You know, let's do that.
That's right. Robin Majors said, "It does sound interesting for sure." Hi, Robin. Yes, it does, doesn't it, Robin? It sounds really, really good. I want to know what's in the middle of the jungle.
There you go.
I'm going to have to buy the book to find out.
If they're going to get back. They're going to make it. They're going to be all right. I don't know. I'm worried.
It sounds really good. It really does.
It does.
Robin wants to know what's in the middle of the jungle, too. What is it?
You have to read. You have to. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the first chapter up on my blog. I have a blog tomorrow where I talk about book reviews, because my blog goes back and forth. Sometimes it's a little political. Sometimes it goes back to where it normally was, but about writing. And my blog tomorrow is about reviews, book reviews, and how they can impact authors and good ones and bad ones and all that. And what I've done is I've included about 4 or 5 reviews of my own book so people can get some idea. Because I tell people, if you're going to write a review, don't just say, "I like this book," or "I hated this book," or "I didn't like this book because of this or that." If you're going to do a review, you've got to get into what moved you about it. What the characters did to you, what the story did to you, how it made you feel. These are things that really good reviewers understand how to do, because that then gets people excited about the book. They want to see it. They want to see what that experience is themselves. And if you say, "Great book, I enjoyed it, bye," that's not a review. That's just somebody stating an opinion.
Hey, Ron,
is your blog on your Substack? Is your blog on your Substack, or is it on your website?
Yes, it is. My blog is either on my own website, ronaldyatesbooks.com, or it's on Substack. Both.
Okay.
You can get any of my blogs by going to Substack.
Yep. Okay. So you can either find it at Ron Yates Substack, or you can find it at ronaldyatesbooks.com, and you can find out what this new book is going to be like. That's going to be great.
That's a great way to do it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first chapter of the new book that I'm working on, it's not finished yet, and just throw it up on my blog and let people take a look at that first chapter and have them get back to me and tell me what they like. It's a way of doing getting beta readers,
There you go. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah,
I like
it.
It
is. Yeah, beta readers that have no skin in the game.
I've used them a lot. I use them for my entire trilogy. Every book in my trilogy, I use the same beta readers. I have about 7 or 8 people, and they've given me such good advice, after they read the books. It's just great. I love that, and I use professional editors. I even though I write and I've been an editor myself, I know everybody needs an editor. Everybody does. And so I use professional editors. I pay them. It costs a little bit of money to do that, but you want to do it because it makes your book better.
Well, you get so close to it that it's hard to see. You know what you're saying or what you tried to say, and you read it that way.
Right.
And quite often you'll have letters switched around or missing a word here and there, and you're just so close to it, you can't see that half the time.
The same with trying to get an idea across.
Yes.
You know what the idea
Right.
is, and sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
You can't see
So
that you
it's
didn't get
good to
that
have
idea
another
across.
voice over here.
And an editor can say,
That doesn't make
Well,
sense.
like you say, Rod, you get so close to the story, you don't see the warts.
Right.
You know?
Even when you read it 5 or 6 times, I mean,
You don't see it.
That's why you don't see it, because you're phasing out as you read every time. You know. Yeah.
And an editor will tell you, no, you've used this particular expression way too often.
Yeah, we've done that before.
And I look at it and say, what? I really? And I start going to, oh my God, she's right. You know, I've been using this expression way too much. You know,
we all do
We've all
that.
done that, I think.
We all do that. I'm telling you, our
and I
10-year-old.
thought I said, I'm a pretty good writer, but I was getting into that same trap, you know. So there you are.
Yeah, well, yeah. A novel is a lot more words than, doing a report, I'm sure, as a journalist. So it's easy to do. Joe Conchel says, I agree on reviews. I also believe that posting a synopsis of the story is not really reviewing the book. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Exactly right.
Joyce Shelton says, you can read over your own mistakes because they're correct in your head. That's right.
Exactly
because
right.
you know what you're meaning to say. So that's right. That's what you're trying to say.
Right.
And Chris Chrisman says, we fill in the blanks as writers. LOL. Yes. Yes.
We do.
And it took a nurse friend of mine to say, did you mean to say they dosed somebody? And I'm like, what? And we meant to say they dozed.
Instead of they
dosed.
They dozed off. They dozed.
Okay.
So,
and we can spell doze and dose,
dozy
but you know what? And Marjorie Daring says, text-to-voice programs are also a great help. Hearing even an artificial voice reading your writing book back to you works quite well. Yeah, our computers have that.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people do that nowadays because then they can pick up the mistakes when it'll say dose instead of doze. You're like, nope, I didn't mean to say that.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really funny. I know that one of our main characters in our trilogy is named Siobhan, which I'm an Irish Catholic from Boston. Everybody knows what Siobhan is. And one of our beta readers said, is that a Swedish name and how do you pronounce it? So we had to put the pronunciation and say what it meant and that it was Irish. So, but to me, that was we named our son Sean and we spelled it the Irish way, S-E-A-N. And in school, he was always called Scene and he didn't know who the heck they were talking to.
Oh, that's terrible. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. But, that's the way it goes. Well, I can't wait for that book to come out.
Yeah, that's going to be good.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let us know.
Yeah, I definitely will. It's I don't know exactly. It depends on how ambitious I am here.
Yeah.
I want to get it finished. The trouble is, you know yourself, when you're writing fiction, what happens is you get into the story, you got the story going, you get through that middle part, now you're coming toward the end, and you're thinking to yourself, now how do I want to end this story? And it sometimes, with the trilogy, it wasn't that difficult because I knew I was going to pick it up with the next book. So ending the third book was a challenge for me. But I knew what was going to happen to Billy. He was going to die when he reached 100 years of age. So it wasn't as if it was going to be, he's not going to survive and become something else, he's still going to die. But how did he do it? And what led up to it? So I had to structure that. With other books, this particular book that I'm working on now, how do I want to end this? And what do I want to leave people hanging so I can write a sequel?
Yeah.
Or do I want to end it right now and let people wonder what's going to happen, or it actually did happen? I don't know yet. That's just that's the great thing about writing fiction as opposed to being a journalist. In journalism, you have to work with the facts. You have to work with what people actually say. You can't make it up. And well, let's put it this way. Today, I can't say that's not the case. I think journalism has declined so much. When I started out, just as an aside here, when I started out in journalism, the Pew Research Center down in Florida, they always publish a study, and they talk about journalism and how people view it. So when I was starting out in 1970, early 70s at the Chicago Tribune, the number was this: 76% of Americans said they trusted journalists and they trusted the journalism they were seeing, reading, and hearing and seeing on TV.
Yeah.
You know what that figure is today?
No.
29%.
I believe
from
it.
76%. Why is that? Why is it? Because journalists themselves are not being honest, and they've let themselves become opinionated, and they put their own opinions into stories. They don't keep their biases and their prejudices out of their stories, and that's causing people not to trust them. And that is the problem, and we need to get back to it. And the problem the reason this happened is that in most newsrooms, when I started out, you had a lot of older journalists, people who've been around many years. They were mentors. They could help you. They taught you things. They told you things. Young journalists today going into these newsrooms don't have that, because the old people have all been let go because it costs money. It's much cheaper to hire a 22-year-old kid than to have somebody who's 62, right? So there's no mentoring going on. There's no structure, and you don't have editors who are yelling at you. I can remember people yelling at me when I was at the Tribune. Don't, Yates, take this out. This is your opinion. Get this the hell out of the story. That doesn't belong there. I learned from being yelled at, essentially. Nobody's yelling.
Also, I've noticed that on the news, that when we're watching the news, that the anchors are news readers.
Yes.
So they're not exactly journalists, you know what I mean?
And
they'll read the news, and I've noticed this more than once. They will tell a story, right? They report on a story. And then the next day there'll be something else about it, and they'll say, "Oh, when did that happen?" And I'm thinking, I just heard you tell that story yesterday. You're not paying any attention. They're not paying any attention to even what they're reading.
Not to mention they grab all these visual images from their files, and they put these images out there that really might have something to do with the subject, but not with the individual story. So it's like really stupid, Yeah. Why do that? Show the person reporting, and don't throw all these images at us,
that aren't accurate to the story.
Have nothing to do with anything,
Right. Well, what you see often, especially with broadcast media, is they parrot one another. Somebody will use a word, like I remember several years ago, the word was gravitas. That person doesn't have enough gravitas to become president. So everybody has started using gravitas. I couldn't believe it. Everybody was saying gravitas. Stop saying that. Why are they doing it? Because there's no originality. I mean, please. That's the broadcast world. You don't see it so much in the print world, but with broadcasting, that's how it is. It's very fast. You've got to be sharp. You got to be on point all the time. People are watching. People are listening. So you've got to demonstrate a certain amount of knowledge, even if you don't have it. You have to at least act like you've got it. And that's what's, I think, a lot of what was wrong with journalism today is that's what's happening. And I think it's sad just to see what's happening to our newspapers, our broadcast, our radio, all that stuff is just really terrible. And now it's on to social media, and you can't trust that at all.
Marjorie says journalism is a job. Writing fiction is fun and a heck of a lot of work.
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
George Dismuke says half of the TV reporters these days don't know how to pronounce the names of the places and countries they're reporting about.
Right.
Oh my gosh, George,
right.
That is so true. And I'm thinking, oh Lord, I know you have a college degree, but did you go to kindergarten or sixth grade? Because I'm thinking maybe not,
That's right.
And
No, you're right.
Marjorie Deering says, and an echo chamber. They do echo each other.
Mm-hmm.
And George says, the problem with journalists today is that the reporters have IQs that match their age. Oh, dear. But it is, it's really, that's why we don't trust them, is because it is so different, you know? And we're old enough to know what it used to be like, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, when I left the Tribune and I went to the University of Illinois, I went there to be a professor, and so they brought me in, and they brought me in with as a full professor with tenure, and I was head of the Department of Journalism, and I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then the dean of the college at which the Department of Journalism was located left, and then the university asked me to be the dean of the college. I never thought that would ever happen because I'm not an academic. I've got a degree, but I'm not an academic. And so here I was running this entire college with Department of Advertising, journalism, and all this other stuff in it. But what I really enjoyed about being there was teaching. And I loved teaching the young people because I felt as a journalist like myself, I hired 2 other journalists who both had won Pulitzer Prizes. I brought them onto my faculty, one from the Washington Post and one from the Chicago Tribune. And with that kind of credibility, I never won a Pulitzer. I was nominated 3 times. So I'm like one of those Oscar people who gets nominated for an Oscar and never gets one, you know. But I finished second once. They told me you finished second. Okay, fine. It's not important. It's not important. Really, you don't get into journalism for money or awards. You've got to get into it because it's something that drives you. It's because you think it's a calling. It's not a calling like being a minister or something like that, but it's a calling in a different way. And you have to respect the responsibility that you have to provide unbiased, accurate news. And if you don't do that, you're doing this service to the people who read you or listen to you or watch you.
Joe Conjal says, we need Cronkite back. And I bet you right there that everybody believed Walter Cronkite. I mean, when you were talking about that survey, that's who he was, the voice of the nation, and we listened to him and we believed what he said. You know.
Well, you know what happened. You know, in 1968, he went to Vietnam, Saigon. He was on the ground there, and after spending about 3 months or so on the ground, he came back and he did his news show. And then after the end of the show, he said, "Now I'm going to take my reporter's hat off, and I'm going to tell you what I think, my personal opinion about what's happening there." And he said, after spending this time there and seeing what's going on, I've come to the conclusion that despite all of the effort and all of the loss and everything else, this is a war that we cannot win. Given what we're doing right now, we can't win this war. And what did Lyndon Johnson say? If I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost the country.
Yep. And that's the truth, because everybody believed him.
Yes. And so at least he said, I'm taking off my journalist hat. I'm telling you my personal opinion. That's what journalists need to do. Mm-hmm. When I used at the Tribune, I used to write, there used to be a section of the Tribune called Perspective. That's where you could write your opinions, where you could write it. You could cover a story for a couple of weeks or whatever. Then you'd come back and write what you think about it. Mm-hmm. But that's where it belongs, not in the news stories.
Right.
The trouble is today it's just bleeding together, and you don't have that kind of separation, and that's really sad. Mm-hmm. Very sad. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, a democracy needs a reliable press. It needs it, and we just don't have it anymore.
Boy, that's the truth. That's the truth, though, isn't it? That's what freedom of speech is all about, and that's why we need to have a press that's free. I mean, countries that are oppressed don't have free speech. They don't have free speech in their press.
They don't. And what worries me, and what has been worrying me for the last few years, has been the amount of censorship that we're seeing in our own country now, and people who seem to be willing to accept it. Nobody should accept censorship. I don't care if it's on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. It shouldn't be acceptable. And I know these are private companies, so they can have control over what they put up. But the fact is, why censor anything? Why? You know, these places, because of their situation, they're privately owned and whatever. They don't belong to they don't belong to the category of TV stations that are controlled by the FCC. But there's no reason why you shouldn't have platforms that are open forum, where you can express your opinions, short of, calling for violence against people or whatever. I think there's a point where you have to kind of respect that, and getting into profanity and all the other stuff and calling people horrible names and attacking them and whatever. That's not.
But that is allowed. However,
right. I mean,
that's allowed.
Yeah.
People
but
can
I think
do
what you want
that.
to do is have that free flow of information. That's what makes a democracy work. If you don't have it, you can't debate anything. If you can't debate anything, how do you make decisions?
We do need to debate. I like debating. That's how you learn. Robin
Exactly.
Major said, at this point, journalists splash their opinions around as though they are a fact.
That's true.
Yeah,
I taught a course there was a small college, this college in Georgia, and a friend of mine works there, and he called me one time and said, would you teach a class, Zoom class, during COVID, about the media? And I said, sure. So I taught 2 semesters of this class, and we talked about these issues in the media. A lot of people had no idea what I was talking about. They couldn't detect the difference between opinion and news. It had become so combined in their minds, they couldn't distinguish the difference between news or opinion.
Wow.
And I told them to separate these things now. You have to learn to separate. You as a consumer have to be a consumer who is discerning. You have to look at the product that they're sending to you, and you've got to make a decision. Is this something you want to believe or not? And these are the things you can watch for if you to detect bias. I put out a bias meter, detectometer for people, so they could kind of look at a story and determine whether or not it was factual or biased or whatever. So these are things that people need to start doing.
As reading any of these, scientific reports, you need to see if that's peer reviewed, who paid for it, who paid for that research. I mean, if you want to learn anything, you have to be a good researcher. You have to see what you're reading, who wrote it, why did they write it, did someone pay them to write it? And, and has there been a peer review of what they're saying that they've accomplished or whatever? You need to have different peer review papers to find out.
You can't just look at the results and say, oh, okay, well, I won't drink caffeine anymore then.
Because that's going to change next week.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be another company that says that it's good, and then one that says it's bad. Right now, it's good again.
Yeah.
So you can all drink caffeine. It helps your kidneys and your heart.
Right.
Yeah, well, Ron, this has been great.
It's been amazing.
It's been an
I'm
amazing
sure, and I know
time.
our audience has loved it.
Yeah. Glad you joined us. And,
well, I'm glad you invited me, and I'll be happy to come back anytime. Maybe when I get this next book finished.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
And you'll find out what that object is, Joan.
What?
You'll find out what that object is then.
In the jungle.
Oh, I thought you'd maybe tell me. I thought I'd trick you there. Marjorie Deering said, my gosh, Ron, you fit more into one life than umpteen people together. Wow, thanks for sharing with us. Joe Conjal says, what an interesting show tonight. Love listening to Ron's writing journey. Thanks to Ron and, of course, Robin Joan. Thank you. And Paul Hollis, wonderful show. Very interesting history. A ton of knowledge here tonight. Thank you, Ron, Robin, Joan. And that's from another analyst that worked for the government.
Yeah, NSA.
NSA analyst right there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, Paul Hollis. You should
written
check him out.
The Hollow Man series. He talks about his adventures as an NSA analyst. George Dismuke says, exceptional show, in my opinion. I knew you'd love it, George. And Chris Chrisman says, great show. Thanks, Ron. And Robin Major says, thanks all and have a good night. Always enjoy this show. Thank you, Robin. We always enjoy having you in the audience.
For sure. Thank you, everybody.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to move you over to the side now, Ron.
Okay.
Stay right where you're at until we come back to you, and then
all right.
The coast will be clear. Episode Rewind this Saturday, 5:30 p.m. It's Shaniqua Karanja, children's author. Lovely
The wonderful person.
And we enjoyed that one very much.
Talking about how to explain the death of a child to your other children.
Next week, Joe Conjol is going to entertain us.
Next week, Joe talking about his new book.
Yeah, same time, same place. Next week at 7 o'clock live. And stay tuned here and now for the way that you can get into watch or participate in the Voice of Indie podcast. Oh boy. Okay. Yep.
Oh,
you got to follow.
I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one, but you can do it, Betty. You can do it.
You can do it.
We have confidence in you. So thank you so much. Until next time.
That's all, folks.
Night.
Live every Wednesday, your Voice of Indie hosts Beam Weeks and Stephen Gees welcome authors, musicians, publishing industry pros, artists, and assorted creative guests for an exciting interactive hour. Call in during the show or post questions and comments on Twitter for responses in real time. Meet your favorite indie creators, learn inside tips, network, and promote your work. The link for each week's show is pinned on Twitter atop @VoiceOfIndie. And you can receive the link every Wednesday morning in your inbox by subscribing to our newsletter at freshinkgroup.com. Check out Voice of Indie every Wednesday on Blog Talk Radio and catch hundreds of episodes archived everywhere from our websites to our YouTube channel and Spotify.
Thank you for joining us here on Meet the Author. Make sure you stay up to date with our show by clicking like, follow, and share. And you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and more. See you next time on WLFE-DB.com.
You've been listening to WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.